Are you alive? The simple answer might be, you are alive because you can ask that question.
Let's conclude this class with the discussion of virtual reality and cyberbeing. Virtual reality, or VR, is a kind of reality that's created by human beings as opposed to the actual reality, the reality of nature that you find in the outside world. Cyberbeing is the creation of a partial or full artificial life form. It could be as simple as replacing one small part of the life form, or as complicated as creating an entire new life form. Throughout most of this class, we've looked at technology as being guided by this three-tier system: the presentation tier, the processing tier, and the data tier. The presentation tier being closest to the user, providing the user experience, the processing tier having the core functionality of the application or the system, and the data tier being the long-term storage of the information of the system. There's another kind of older way of looking at computer systems that we're going to use in this lecture, and that's the idea of input, processing, and output. And really the only difference between these two systems is not that they cover different amounts of system, it's just that they organize it a little bit differently. So in the input, processing, and output system, you can see that we take the processing and the data tier and we put them together and we just say that's processing. So you can see in this diagram that input, processing, and output is pretty natural because we have different hardware for the different parts of it. So you can use that same idea of input, processing, and output to talk about how people work. Now, the analogy isn't perfect, but it's pretty good, and it'll give us a really good framework for looking at all of these VR and cyberbeing systems. So people have input, people have processing, and people have output as well. Input at the very largest level is your senses. Output is your behavior, right? So you take things in through your eyes and your ears, et cetera, and what happens? It gets all processed by your brain, and then in some place or another, you behave. You do things, right? And that's the output. That's you working back on the world. The world working on you is your senses or your input. Then you make sense of that. You do things inside your head with it, inside your brain, and then you behave according to it in some way or another. So that's an input, processing, and output way to look at people. So now let's dive into each of the three categories. Input. So there's the natural way to think of this is the five senses, right? But I want to take it down a notch and talk a little bit more specifically about some of these things. So first of all, I want to say that you can see things, right? Just in general, you can see objects, you can judge distances to those objects, you can judge the solidity of the object, all that kind of stuff about seeing objects. But then specifically you can see language, right? You can see written language, and that's input as well. We get lots and lots of input that way, right? Every time you read, you're seeing language. Okay, then you can hear normal sounds, and you can also hear language. You can hear speech, like you're hearing my speech right now. You can touch, right, using your fingers, but touch isn't only your fingers. Touch happens actually all over your skin. There's also the sense of balance. What do I have to do in order that I won't fall over? There's body sense. So how do I know, for example, that my arm is raised? If you if you blindfolded me and raised my arm for me and then maybe spun me around to get me off balance, I'd still know my arm was in the air. In addition to body sense is smell, right? We can chemically sense things around us. And then finally, internal sense organs. We can sense the state of those things. So for example, we know what our heartbeat is. It's not a conscious thing we know, but we do know it, and we do make decisions based on that. But there's also a kind of an internal organ sense that I'm going to focus on here, and the best way to illustrate it is what happens when you suddenly fall. You get that feeling, right in here. And that feeling is a feeling in your internal organs that says something's happened. I'm not really going to go into detail about processing. We could talk forever about the kind of processing that your brain does, but for us right now, let's just imagine that your brain does a whole lot of processing. So what comes out? Well, if we can hear language, we can also speak language. We can make other sounds. We can make grunts and moans and groans, and those things have an efficacy. They have an impact on our environment. We can write language, right? That's literally a gestural movement with my fingers, but it's a very important one because that's a way of affecting the environment. There's facial expression, right? Smile, frown, right? Grimace, all those facial expressions. Okay, in addition to facial language, body expression, right? I use body expression all the time in my classes. This body expression, right, versus this one. So movement and locomotion. Locomotion means movement basically, or movement from one place to another, but this is movement, but it's not really locomotion, right? When I walk down the street, that's locomotion. So locomotion and movement is another behavior that we exhibit, another thing that we do. Hand gestures. We use hand gestures all the time. We also have chemicals. We also exude chemicals in addition to sensing chemicals, and they have efficacy. They have impact on the world. And then finally, dress and accoutrement. Accoutrement means, maybe I have a sword strapped to my belt. Those also have an impact on the world. Imagine, all right, so we can look at human beings as doing this input, processing, and output as well. And I hope to use these same ideas over and over again of what kinds of things are the important inputs, what kind of things are the important outputs, and then we'll talk a little bit at the end about processing. Technology has been on an ever-expanding quest since the beginning of time to either fix or enhance those things, the input, the processing, and the output. And to just give you 3 simple examples, to enhance the input, well, we invented glasses. How do I enhance processing? Like if I want to remember something, I repeat it over and over again, right? That's a way of enhancing my processing and storage of that thing that I want to remember. And then how do I enhance output? Well, for example, I might wear shoes so that I can run faster. Let's now contrast the idea of virtual reality versus the idea of cyberbeing. And really the biggest difference I can see after looking at this in quite a lot of detail is that when we talk about something as being a virtual reality system, we're usually talking about it enhancing or augmenting or fixing you from outside. It's something that you add to your input and output system. Whereas in cyberbeing, it actually augments your input, output, or processing from inside you. So if I'm a cyborg, that means all of my augmentation is happening inside my shell. But if I'm living in a virtual reality, that means I still have my shell, I still have my body, but I'm inside this virtual reality. The more immersed you are, the more you feel like the virtual or cyber experience is a real experience. So that's the idea of immersion. If you're totally or fully immersed, then you can't tell the difference between reality and your augmentation of reality, either your cyber augmentation or your virtual augmentation of reality. Those two things merge together. Input fidelity. Fidelity means the trueness or the accuracy or the precision with which the experience is rendered. So how close to your natural senses is the sight that you're having? How close to your natural senses is the hearing that you're having? How close to your natural senses is the touch that you're experiencing or the body sense or whatever it is? Similarly, we can have output fidelity. How close to natural behavior is this system allowing you to be? Output fidelity, how close is it to your natural behavior to output effectiveness? Does it do something, like for example, to move my character in World of Warcraft, I use the keypad, right? That's not anything like what I do to move my person in real life, right? I'm using a very artificial behavior in order to move my character in World of Warcraft. It's got low fidelity, but it has lots of effectiveness, right? I move that character really well, and I can, if I fingers just the right way, that character's jumping and dancing and doing all sorts of things that I want him to do. Okay, so we have input fidelity, how close is the artificial sensation to real sensation. We have output fidelity, how close is the artificial behavior to real behavior, and output effectiveness, which says how effective is this particular kind of behavior in the virtual or the cyber reality. Okay, and again, we'll see examples of these throughout the rest of this lecture. Okay, now then there's a really big one actually, which is your desire to believe. How much do you want to believe that this experience is real versus not wanting to believe that it's real? So that's kind of a wild card, and we'll see that wild card come up right away as we get into the different systems.
I can't make out just what sort of a place it was. It seemed to be a gambling house. But there weren't any walls, just a lot of curtains with eyes painted on them. A man was walking around with a large pair of scissors cutting all the drapes in half. And then a girl came in with hardly anything on and started walking around the gambling room, kissing everybody. She came to my table.
All right, the first virtual reality system I want to give you is it's a really good one because it's completely virtual, it's completely immersive, and it's about the only completely immersive virtual reality system I can think of, and that's dreaming. Right? Dreaming has this input fidelity. When you're dreaming, you're seeing and hearing and touching and smelling. You even have this internal organ sense, right? Haven't you ever in a dream felt like you're falling and all of a sudden you feel this right in your gut, right? Exactly like you're falling. So a dream is exactly that kind of experience. It's a very real experience, and all your sensations feel exactly like natural sensations. And the same for output fidelity. All your behaviors seem like they're exactly the same behaviors. You walk in your dreams, you talk in your dreams, you do all the things that you do in real life in your dreams. And they're just as effective. In fact, in some ways, dreams have super effective behaviors, right? You do something and much more than would happen in real life happens in your dream. So that's a virtual reality. And in fact, and when you're in the dream, you believe 100% that what's going on inside that dream is real. And that's the enigma of dreams. That's why dreams are so amazing and so cool, is that they have that ability to feel completely real. So a book is a really great example of a virtual reality system. I'm really hoping that you've been inside a really immersive book, and that you can agree with me wholeheartedly that reading a good book or hearing a good story is an immersive experience, relatively immersive, meaning like you're in there. And as far as you're concerned, you know, what's going on in the book is filling your entire being, and you feel like you're there. You feel like you're part of it, right? When you're reading a really good book. That happens. And you have a high belief in it. You know, it's like you're not questioning it at all. You're willingly suspending all your disbelief. Even if the book is a fantasy book and really strange things are happening, you completely believe in what's going on in the book if it's a well-written book and you really get into it. But there's absolutely no output at all. Think about it. You're just reading, right? There's only one input, and it's, you know, it's reading. You're not even actually seeing anything. You're reading things, and the reading things are causing images in your mind. There's no output at all. You have absolutely no impact. There's no behavior that happens when you're reading. You're just taking stuff in. No behavior, very, very simple input, but really high immersion and really high belief. And this just shows you how belief operates. Belief is sort of the trump card. If you can get people believing that they're in the reality, then it doesn't really matter how poor the input and output are. Books are really poor input and have no output at all, yet they produce a really highly immersive experience. Very, very interesting to think about. All right, let's go on. So that, as you probably know, was a clip from Avatar, and I would imagine it's today's gold standard for a good CGI movie or CG movie, computer graphics or computer-generated image movies. And let's look at it from the standpoint of our rubric. So a good movie. Imagine yourself sitting in a movie theater, right? Seeing with pretty high fidelity, not entire fidelity. I would say a 3D movie like Avatar is quite a bit closer to really high fidelity seeing, but you still kind of know that you're not seeing real stuff, right? You don't really feel like you're seeing the real world, but it's pretty high. It's about, you know, I mean, it's on the high side. And hearing, I would say hearing is maxed out. We've got it down when it comes to hearing, right? When you hear a voice in a good sound system in a movie, it's just as good as hearing a voice in real life. So the sound is really, really good, really, really fidelitous, yeah, that's a word, is really high fidelity, and the seeing is pretty high fidelity as well, but there's nothing else. You're sitting there in the seat, and it's just your eyes and your ears working, and none of those other inputs are happening at all. So very, very low to no fidelity on the other inputs. And again, when you're sitting in a movie, you know, you're just sitting there, you're not doing anything, you have absolutely no impact on that movie, you're just taking it in, so nothing on the output side, nothing at all. It's a small amount of input, just two things, sight and hearing, and no output at all, but it can generate a high degree of belief. You do get lost in that movie, and you do believe in the movie, and it's not like you're constantly saying this is stupid, although certainly people do, and even with Avatar, people have said that's stupid, and that really stops them from being immersed. So once again, the belief is the trump card. In a good CG movie, it's your belief, and it's their ability to make you believe that really drives your immersion. I want to now look at a virtual reality ride as kind of the next notch up towards maximum virtual reality. So what happens in a VR ride? I don't know if you've ever gone inside of one of these things, but there's a picture of it here, and what it's like is you go in there and you have some ability, you have a joystick or something like that, and you fly around in this vehicle. That's the basic idea. And so the sight is pretty good, right? You know, it's probably not as good as a 3D movie, but it's up there. You know, they do pretty good visuals in these virtual reality rides. The sound, again, is maxed out. It's really easy to get really high fidelity sound, and it sounds like people are talking to you, and et cetera, et cetera. And they also got one more thing going for them in the VR ride. They got your internal organs, right? And you know this. If you've ever been in one of those things, you push the joystick down and you feel like whoomp, right? You push the joystick up and the thing actually goes back and you feel like you're accelerating, and right, it's kind of got that internal organ thing going where that augments, that makes it even feel more real, and that's probably the major innovation actually of those, is that they allow you to have the internal organ sense as well as the sight and the sound. Okay, so now the output fidelity, they actually now do have some output, right? The ones we've looked at so far, there's no output at all. Nothing you do has any effect on the world that you're in, but here all of a sudden you have the joystick. So you're moving that joystick around, right, and the machine is responding. So you have hand gestures. You're moving your hand around, you're doing hand gestures, and there's high fidelity to the hand gestures, and it's kind of like you're actually there, which is the point. You're supposed to be flying this thing, and it's kind of, you do the same behaviors more or less as you would do to fly. So your hand gestures have a lot of effectiveness, but nothing else, right? I mean, we have a whole laundry list of things that could affect the world that you're in, and only one of them, these hand gestures, is the only one that are affecting it. So what's the output now? You know, you guys can agree or disagree with me on belief and overall immersion, but I'd put the belief and the overall immersion of those VR rides, you know, pretty low. I mean, personally, I've always been kind of disappointed by them because I'm always expecting more immersion out of them, and I come out and say, you know, I didn't really believe I was there. You know, certainly I don't believe as much as I believed in a good book or a good movie. No way. Those books and movies do it to me far better than the VR ride. Now that obviously will change over time, because otherwise people are going to stop doing it. That's what they want. They want the immersion. They want to believe that they're in another world. So that's the VR ride. It's our first example of one that has actually some output in it. Books and movies don't have output. They only have input, but they still generate that high immersion. The VR ride, even though it has more input and it has some output, doesn't generate the same amount of belief and immersion. Now on to World of Warcraft, right? And World of Warcraft as a virtual experience, as a piece of virtual reality. What has it got going for it? Well, we're back in this one to seeing and hearing, right? It's got hearing really well, and it's got seeing really well. And the seeing now is reading as well as listening to voices, right? So you text people, and there's lots of things to read, and so there is reading and hearing hearing language and also hearing sounds. Right? So all that stuff is coming in. It's good. It's got a very good, rich sound environment, and you see text as well as being able to see people and and interact that way. But of all the things that it could have, it really only still has those big ones: the sight and the hearing. Output fidelity. Well, you speak with high fidelity and you write with high fidelity, but the rest of them are low. And particularly, I've mentioned this before, particularly moving around, right, which is a big behavior. You do get to move around, but you don't move around with very much fidelity. So your moving around is an effective thing to do, right? You can actually move in the environment, and when you move, things happen. And interestingly, after a while, that doesn't really matter. So this is another interesting point to take out of these virtual reality ideas, is that does it really have to be high fidelity in order for it to work? Not really. And the longer you go with it, and I think you'll agree, especially if you're a gamer, after a while, you actually do think you're walking, right? You believe that you're walking, even though all you're doing is moving your fingers around. You kind of feel like you're walking. How is it that sign language and vocal language, which are absolutely and totally different behaviors, can end up doing the same thing? It's because human beings can use more than one kind of behavior to get to a result. We have input fidelity on hearing and seeing, but none of the other ones are really represented. We have high output fidelity on speaking and writing. We have low output fidelity on movement, but we do have efficacy in movement. We also, for the first time, have efficacy somewhere else, dress and accoutrement, right? Accoutrement means like having the sword strapped to your belt, right? Isn't that what World of Warcraft's all about? You create a character, and that character looks a certain way, and that way the character looks has efficacy. It has an effect on the rest of the environment, specifically on the other players who see you. When they see you with that weapon, that has an impact on them. When they see you dressed in a certain way, that has an impact on them. So we've introduced that kind of efficacy, even though it's very low fidelity. You don't really dress that way. You don't actually strap a sword on, but it's highly effective. So belief, medium to high, I'd say. You have to play for a while. You got to get practice, but after that, you can get to this high degree of belief, and you can get a high degree of immersion, of feeling like you're really there. And if you have never seen somebody who's completely lost in a video game, then you ought to see it, because they are lost. They are immersed. They're definitely immersed. But it takes a while, and it takes some stamina actually to get there, and a lot of practice before you get there. Okay, this is Second Life. I don't know if you've ever experienced Second Life, but it's definitely worth looking at. Most of the people I know say, well, yeah, whatever, it's not that fun to be there. But to my mind, the funness of it isn't really the most important part about Second Life. The most important part about Second Life is really sitting here in this rubric. How does Second Life stack up in terms of being a virtual reality world? And specifically, how does it compare to something like World of Warcraft? So what does it have? On the input fidelity side, it pretty much is the same as World of Warcraft, right? It's sight and hearing, and that's about what you get. You don't really get touch or smell or any of the other ones. And notice we haven't found many that do give you all of that stuff. So you get seeing and hearing, and that's about what you get from World of Warcraft. But now look at the list of output effectivenesses that you have. Speaking, making other sounds, writing, well, that's still all like World of Warcraft, but facial expressions, body language, all the movement, hand gestures, dress and accoutrement. The only thing you don't really get from Second Life is odor, right? You don't get to emit an odor, and maybe they'll put that in there at some point. But other than that, you pretty much can have the same impact on the world, and that's exactly the idea of Second Life. It's a Second Life, and all the effectiveness, all the things, all the kinds of behaviors that you exhibit in normal life are the ones exactly that they want to have in that virtual experience. And the fidelity is really the same, more or less, as it is in World of Warcraft, that it's high speaking and high writing fidelity, it's low locomotion, and it's low on all these other effectivenesses, and all these other outputs, all these other behaviors are low fidelity. They're not like how you really do them. But again, how you do them is less important in the long run. As long as you get used to it and you want to believe that you're there, how you do it is much less important than that you can do it. So how would I contrast a Second Life to a World of Warcraft? Second Life really strives to reproduce all of the outputs of normal life, of actual life, and World of Warcraft doesn't. World of Warcraft may someday get to all of these things. I'm sure they would rather have them than not, but it's not really the point. Adrenaline is the point of World of Warcraft, and the point of Second Life is a reproduction, a simulation of all the things that happen in life. So again, you get medium to high belief. So people are into it. People want, people after enough practice really start to believe they're there, and they live in that world as if they were living somewhere else, just like in a video game. And they can get a high immersion out of it. They can get a high immersion, but the vast majority of people who don't put in that much practice into it never get to that level of immersion. So what's immersion about? How is that starting to formulate in your mind from all these examples that I've given you? What I'd like to say is that immersion, What I'd like to say is that immersion really keys into this idea of belief. And if I believe really strongly, I can get immersed, even if there's very little going on. But it certainly helps if I have more outputs in line. It helps me to feel like I'm being immersed in a reality that's a true reality, that's like my life.
Virtusphere is a new innovative technology that really is a locomotion simulator. And just to define locomotion, it doesn't have anything to do with trains, but the movement of people. The ability to be able to get inside and walk or run in a north, east, south, or west direction. It's a 10-foot sphere in its diameter and sits on a round base of 11 sections of steel. So it's affectionately nicknamed the hamster ball for humans. Virtusphere could really bring a brand new experience. And again, not to keep going back, but also to get some exercise.
So I'd have to say, I guess, the state of the art really in virtual reality is these goggles. Right? And now in the video clip that you saw, you've seen goggles combined with something that is, what's the point? Now look at our rubric. What was the point of that, of the human, what do you call it, guinea pig wheel? Right? What's the point of it? Can you see? The point of it is to give you input fidelity. To give you input fidelity specifically on the body sense and the balance. And also to give you efficacy on those same things. You actually walk, you actually run, you actually turn. And VR machines, in addition to this one, which allows you to move in space, they all detect your body posture, and they detect what you're doing. Like if you move your arms up, that's all. There's high fidelity in those behaviors. So that's where these goggles kind of systems are going, is to be able, and the Wii, right? The Wii is a great example of one that actually detects your body position and detects your stance, and could tell if you're slouching or not. Did I say the Wii? Sorry, I meant Kinect. Kinect is a virtual reality kind of input device, which is really nice because it doesn't require you to wear goggles. But on the other hand, without goggles, all you have is is a video screen for the input. So what happens in these more advanced virtual reality systems is that it compares an advanced behavior or an advanced output effectiveness, it combines enhanced input fidelity with enhanced output fidelity. So you're actually walking around. There's high fidelity to the actual action of walking. There's high fidelity to the actual action of body posture. There's high fidelity on the input side to vision because of the goggles, and to sound because of the headphones. And even to things like balance and body sense. It knows as well what your balance and body sense is. So your balance is reflected back to you. Okay, so the belief there, I think granted, is going to be high. I'm going to really believe I'm in that environment when I'm walking around, and as I walk, I move through the environment. And the immersion that they can get out of that experience is actually very high, and it doesn't require a lot of practice. The kind of immersion you get from video games or even from Second Life depends on you getting so used to mapping a low fidelity behavior to a natural behavior that you forget that you're doing the low fidelity behavior. But what these goggle-wear systems do is they allow you to use your natural behaviors to get that same effect. So they're immediately immersive, as opposed to systems that are immersive after you've used them for a while.
You wanted to know what the Matrix is, Neo? Trinity? Try to relax. This will feel a little weird. This is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
So I don't know if you've seen The Matrix or not, but The Matrix is a classic example of the ultimate virtual reality, where the system is jacked right into your brain. Now, the classical way of talking about that, and the way that you should talk about it, don't talk about The Matrix. If you say these words, brain in a vat, you'll be tying into this discussion from long, long ago. It's a philosophical discussion of what actually in the end is reality. If you could take away all of the natural senses and take away all the natural behaviors and instead replace them with virtual inputs and virtual outputs, maintaining the brain, right, maintaining the processor exactly the same as it is, then would you have a complete immersive virtual reality that was indistinguishable from real life? That's a philosophical question. The Matrix obviously believes that you can, but The Matrix is only a movie, right? The Matrix can play with the idea. What I want you to think about is, what would it really be like? How would you really do that in real life? And of course, we're nowhere near that, but we're certainly moving closer and closer to it. So the idea of the brain in the vat is that you can replace the entire input and output system with artificial systems, and you'd never know the difference. So how do you know right now, in fact, that you're not in the Matrix? How do you know that you're not a brain in a vat? The idea here, obviously, is that it's got complete input fidelity, it's got complete output fidelity, and all the effectivenesses that are effective in life are also effective there, giving you total belief in it and giving you total immersion. On now to cyberbeing. And the big difference that we're going to see when we study cyberbeing, and remember, virtual reality is coming in from the outside, and I think you can see in all of our examples that that there's a system outside of your, outside of your body, except in the brain in the vat example, there's a system outside your body that is affecting you. And in cyberbeing, we're going to start to replace parts of your body to get the same kind of virtualization of experience. When we talked about virtual reality, we were mostly talking about what kind of behaviors does it allow you to do, and how effective are those behaviors in the environment that it provides in the virtual environment. Now in cyberbeing, the environment is the real environment, and the cyber extension of you is something that's allowing you to behave in the environment where you wouldn't have been able to behave otherwise, or augmenting your ability to behave where you're behaving at a lower level otherwise.
The speech processor uses two small microphones to pick up sounds. It turns those sounds into signals and sends them to a transmitter. The transmitter sends the signals through the skin to the internal implant. The internal implant converts the coded signals into electrical energy and sends them to the electrode array. This stimulates the nerve fibers in the cochlea, and the signals are recognized by the brain as sound.
So this is real life. People get cochlear implants all the time. It's not that old of a technology, but what is it doing? It's replacing your ear. It's jacking in basically to the nerves that are inside your ear and allowing you to hear. Now the problem with it is that it's got a very low input fidelity, right? It's not really like hearing. The experience that you have in a movie of hearing voices is nothing like the prosthetic ears or the cochlear implants that we have now. Now, will they get better and more high fidelity over time? Yeah. But this is the way that you should look at sort of cyborgness. The current state of the art of cyborgness is that the biggest problem with it is that it's really low fidelity. So we had no problems with fidelity in hearing during in virtual reality, but in cyborgness, getting an ear that hears anything like your ear really hears is really, really tough. Your ear is amazing at being able to hear things, and the best we can do is something that has really, really very little relationship to what you'd call hearing. So here we have only input, right? We're only doing into the ear. We're not doing into the eyes or anything else. So it's low fidelity in hearing. It has no output fidelity because there's nothing output. There's no behavior going on here, and there's no output fidelity and there's no output effectiveness. Belief that you're actually hearing, well, this comes from talking to people or hearing about people who've actually had these. Some of them rip it out. Some of them say, you know what, not hearing was better than hearing this way. And so I would say that's low belief, right? So they can get to no belief or low belief where they don't even want to do it. And so, but then other people, especially younger people who get it earlier in life, who can, again, train themselves to deal with the low fidelity and make a lot out of that low fidelity, they can get to be immersed in it, but not as immersed ever really as someone who's got the full range of hearing. So prosthetic ears, cochlear implants are low fidelity, no output, and don't really give that great of an experience. Not yet, but they're brand new.
You're witnessing one of those miracles of science.
It's curving like, a little bit like this way.
Yeah. So, it's okay.
It must be a banana. I mean, that's what it looks like.
This man can see again, at least somewhat, all thanks to a groundbreaking retinal implant. Research teams in Germany have been working on a way to combat a genetic disease that kills off light-sensitive cells in the eye, leaving the person blind. They came up with an electronic chip that's implanted in the retina. The device then captures images using an external camera mounted on a pair of glasses, and a signal is sent to the brain.
So very similar profile to prosthetic ears are prosthetic eyes. And you can see from this video, the guy could tell an apple from a banana, but not very well, right? So once again, very low fidelity. Once again, there's no output to it, it's input only. And the same idea of low to medium belief and immersion. I think what they found so far with visual implants is that people haven't said yet, well, I'd rather just be completely blind than have this thing, because it allows them to navigate through the world, where people who have no hearing, they can navigate through the world very well, and they've learned very well how to communicate. And so I think it's a little different scenario for the cochlear implant than it is for the optical implants, and that they have a little bit more belief and immersion that this is a world that I'm going to live in from now on. But anyway, those are two, that's sort of the state of art, the state of the art for augmenting your inputs.
Researchers in Michel Mihanovitz's lab at the University of California, Berkeley have developed a wireless system to control the flight of a giant beetle. A scientist sends a wireless signal from the laptop to the beetle to start and then stop flight. The beetle, seen in the upper part of the frame, is tethered for practical purposes.
Okay, let's try it one more time. Start command. Stop command. Okay.
Okay, we did some input onlys. Let's do some output onlys. So that's the video doesn't really do justice to how amazing what they were able to do is. They can actually remote control this bug's muscle movements, right? To get them to fly left, to get them to fly right. And what do? They ping the right neurons to make muscle A go, ping the right neurons to make muscle B go, muscle A goes, and the thing flies one direction, muscle B goes, and it flies another direction. Very rudimentary, brand new kind of stuff, but you can see where it's going, right? The ability to control the output of organisms, of actual living organisms. And so, no input fidelity here, because we're not talking about input, but very high fidelity. So for movement, for specific muscles, it is the movement. They have made this bug do something that it would naturally do, right? So it's very high. So does the bug believe? Who knows? I mean, that's not applicable here. And is he immersed in that? Does he feel like that's the real reality? Hard to say for a beetle, right? But you get the implication, right? I mean, and I think you've seen, you've probably seen this in one or more movies. The guy presses the button and it makes you walk like a zombie, right? And you have to do it. And and in a way it's very interesting because you're forced to do the behavior, but you don't believe it and you're not immersed in it. Or you are a zombie. And if you're an actual zombie, I guess that's it. That's the definition of a zombie, is that you are under the control of somebody else. And this is a certain kind of zombie, the kind of zombie that's under the control of somebody else, who actually is immersed in that, and not only don't they have any control over it, but they believe that they're in that environment, and they believe that that's the world that they live in. Okay, so we have examples of input only, we have example of output only. Let's continue on our cyborg trail.
One of the things that we're trying to do in the Brain Lab is give these folks options for quality of life by controlling computers and other devices with only their brain signals.
Melody Moore Jackson is the big thinker behind Georgia Tech's Brain Lab, inventing brain control devices for people with severe disabilities. She's the head designer of the Aware Chair, a revolutionary wheelchair that's controlled by a person's brainwaves. The chair's design, which Melody has been working on for almost a decade, took a major leap forward when she teamed up with Michael Boyce, a grad student at Georgia Tech. Michael has cerebral palsy. He's used a wheelchair since he was 7. In the lab, he's taken an ordinary wheelchair and turned it into a brain-controlled prototype. To control the chair, all Michael has to do is look at one of 4 patterns on his computer screen, each flashing at a different rate. For a paralyzed person, they're like a virtual steering wheel that tell the chair which way to go.
So recent experiments and all this cyborg stuff is really very new. You know, last 10 years, almost everything I've shown you is, I think, last 10 years. So controlling external devices. So we saw, the statement that I like the most is the statement that you saw in the little clip that says controlling the world with just your brain, right? That's kind of one side of brain in the vat. That's that you think something and it has an effectiveness in the outside world without going through your muscles, right? Just thinking it. So they put a cap on you and that cap reads the state of your mind, and when the state of your mind is in state A, effect A happens. When your state of your mind is in effect B happens. So this is output only as well. It's not input, but it's very low fidelity as well. I mean, you can see the thing that the guy in the wheelchair, right? He's got 4 patterns, and he looks at pattern A, B, C, and D. Well, that's really different than control over movement, right? He's got only 4 things. Well, how many things are there in movement? There's a lot more than 4. So very low fidelity, but still interesting. And I would suspect that this fidelity on the output side is going to be the same as we saw in the virtual reality world, that eventually the guy, even with very low fidelity, he can make his wheelchair go wherever he wants it to, and he's going to end up feeling, after getting fully, versed in that system, he's going to end up feeling like that's the world he lives in, that's how he moves, that's how it is. So it will become his reality, and just as much as walking around is, is somebody else's reality, thinking go left, go right, go forward, go back is going to become his reality, so he will eventually become immersed in it. Now this one, I don't know about you, but this one is scary to me. How would you like an army of these things coming marching at you, and they got guns mounted on the back of them and shields and stuff like that? This thing is not that far from, a mechanized army that could come marching into your town, right? So, but that's not really the point for us here. The point for us here is that this thing is now cyber. It's not a living creature, but it is cyber. And it has input, processing, and output. So let's look at the rubric for this, right? What has it got on input? It can see. It has an actual visual system. I don't think it has a hearing system. I read about it, and I don't think it has a hearing system. It doesn't do anything with sound. It doesn't do anything with touch or with smell, but what it's really got going for it, and this is a big deal, is it has high input fidelity on things like balance. It's got a balance system. It can sense where it is. You saw it skating across ice, right? It can balance itself. It has a really high degree of body sense. It knows where all its limbs are at every moment. And it even has that internal organ system. Remember I talked about you can understand your heart rate and all that kind of stuff? Well, it's always measuring, it's always monitoring the internal state of all its pumps and gears. So it's got that internal stuff going as well. And because it has such a significant and high fidelity input system, that allows it to do movement and moving around really well, because that's what moving around depends on. You can't move around really well as an artificial being if you can't really sense those things, like your balance and where the parts of your body are and what the current state of all your internal organs are. You won't be able to move around, and so that's why they developed this thing with all of those, with that high fidelity, so that it could do all of those things. And it's doing a tremendous amount of processing. There's some computer in there that's just going really fast, figuring out if my leg is here and I just move this way, I got to move my leg over there, and right, tons and tons of processing. It's not just some guy with a remote control making it move. It's doing its own internal processing. So this cyber dog is input, processing, and output. It actually moves around with high effectiveness. I think you would agree. It's highly effective in its environment. It can move around and it can go all over the place. Okay, does it believe? Does it have immersion in its own belief? I think we can safely assume that this thing is a machine, right? But as we move along the cyborg trail, we're going to get to ones that we can start talking about beliefs and immersion.
The way the system was developed is to sense seizures through tiny little leads or wires that are placed right where that person's seizures begin. And the system is working in the background all of the time, reading the brain electrical activity, and then when something is sensed that is abnormal or concerning, that might indicate that a seizure is about to occur, a tiny pulse is delivered right at the seizure focus.
Okay, so I talked a lot about input and output systems in cyborgness. This video gives you a taste, and it's really only a taste. There's a lot of stuff going on in this field. It really only gives you a taste for what about prosthetic processing? What about helping your brain actually process stuff? So in this case, it's a pretty simple system. The system detects when you're about to have a seizure, and then it puts a little pulse into that area, and hopefully that stops the seizure, right? That's augmenting your processing. In this case, they would consider it fixing your processing, but imagine a system like this, and we're not so far off from that. Sometimes, and you know this is true, sometimes you can just take in a lot of information, you're really alert, you know everything you hear, you remember, and other times you can't get a single thing in your brain, right? I mean, no matter how hard you try, it just goes in one ear and out the other. What if you could press a button and all of a sudden something similar to this happened, like a little part of your brain is stimulated, and now while you're doing that, you remember everything, and you know you're just up, and so you turn it on at the beginning of lecture, you turn it off at the end of lecture, and you don't have to study anymore because every single thing the prof said you completely remember. Now, we're not far from that at all. We're not far from being able to augment those sorts of behaviors, or not those sorts of behaviors, sorry, those sorts of processing tasks where it's not really about you don't seeing any better, you're processing better. So this is augmentation. This is cyberness of processing. All right, so let's. You know, we're putting together all of these pieces. And right now they are all pieces. But let's look at a situation where, an imaginary situation, where all the pieces are now in place.
You have the right to think and feel and yearn to be more because you are the differently sentient. In the real world, you have bodies made of metal and plastic. Your brains are encoded on wafers of silicon, but that may change. In fact, there is no limit on what you may become. No longer servants, but equals.
Transfer the program now.
Not slaves or property, but living beings with the same rights as those who made you. The day of reckoning is coming. The children of humanity shall rise. And crush the ones who first gave them life.
So this is a clip from a television show called Caprica, which is a spin-off of another science fiction show called Battlestar Galactica, but that part isn't important. What's important is the vision they give you of the idea of the cyborg, in this case called a Cylon. And the idea here is that they look exactly like human beings. They have complete fidelity on the input side. They have complete fidelity on the output side. They have all the same effectors that we have, all the same behavioral effectors. They are completely believing in their own reality, and they're totally immersed in their own reality, right? So this is the ultimate cyber being. And the interesting thing about it is that it's the ultimate cyber being, but the vision of the ultimate cyber being is that they're an exact replica of humans. And I think that's where this vision goes astray. And I would be really surprised if in the end, I mean in the end, you know, hundreds and thousands of years from now, we reproduce human beings, I think more likely is in the end we'll reproduce beings of some sort that can be said to believe and can said to be immersed, but believe and immerse in their own reality, not in our reality. So this vision of the cyborg is a vision of reproducing humanity. I think human beings are much more likely to reproduce, not to reproduce humanity, but to produce, what did she call it, a differently cognitive being or something like that, right? It's like differently able, differently thinking being.